Hello, football fans. Welcome to another episode of Football Talk with John and Evan. I'm your host, John Justin Jankowski, with Evan Knows His Football Bonner. It is April 30th. Evan and I are recapping the NFL draft and who the Eagles selected. How are you doing?
I'm good, John. A little sunburnt, but I'm feeling pretty good. I'm excited about this draft. How are you feeling, buddy? I'm
doing great. This is like one draft where picks usually, or when it comes to the Eagles picks, be pleased with who they selected. And Philadelphia, I think, was the best venue the NFL ever had for a draft. That atmosphere was awesome. So many people, the crowd with all the different people making the picks. Great. I thought it looked so cool.
Yeah, I agree, John. Obviously, I wasn't down there. I had you and I were down there actually during the day of Thursday, but we weren't there for the actual draft. And me seeing it on TV, it was really nice. It almost looked more like a rock concert than it did a draft. So I thought Philadelphia did a great job. Everyone, for the most part, respected themselves in the city of Philadelphia. There weren't really any arrests, and which is always big in our area. And I thought it was great. And most importantly, John, I thought this was a pretty solid draft for the Philadelphia Eagles.
And I'll recap of what was the draft like from my perspective after we talk about the picks the Eagles made, because I was actually reporting as a web producer there at the draft. I was working for my TV station. So I actually got to talk to Eagles first-round pick Derek Barnett before the draft started. I got to talk to Rodney McLeod, Eagles starting safety. So I'll share my behind-the-scenes experience at the end of this podcast. But let's get right into it. Round one. First pick off the board, Cleveland Browns, Myles Garrett. Everyone saw that coming. And last week, Evan and I were saying, cheer for quarterbacks to get selected. That's what we were saying. If you want the players that we were talking about the past 12 weeks, cheer for quarterbacks to get taken off the board. And what do you know? Second overall pick, Mitchell Trubisky goes to the Bears. That was a great sign. Then, of course, Thomas goes 3. I mean, everyone had Thomas going in the top 3. Wasn't a big surprise. Then Fournette going 4. I didn't see that one coming. That one shocked me. So I was like, okay, if you want defense, so far 2 offensive players went off the board. This is good. This is good. Number 5, Corey Davis went off the board. A lot of people had Corey Davis going to the Eagles at 14. So this is like another offensive player going in a defensive player first draft. So interesting notes. And then Jalen Adams went 6. A lot of people had Jalen Adams going 3, so Adams at 6 made sense for the Jets. And then, so it's like, okay, the top 2 receivers are up. And then number 8,
But John, did you really think Mike Williams is going to go to the Eagles, though?
I didn't know. I'm just saying, like, it was just good news we wanted defense. I wanted Humphrey. You wanted Derek Barnett. So seeing these offensive players go, that was good news for us.
Oh, that's true. That's very true, John. But anyway, continue, buddy.
So I got to know, 8th pick, Christian McCaffrey gets called for the Panthers. Now, I was in Philly for the draft. I was in the media tent. That was the biggest boos I heard all weekend. I mean, that was bigger than the Drew Pearson boos. When McCaffrey didn't get Carolina, the Philadelphia faithful are upset because it was very clear. That's who the fans wanted. They wanted McCaffrey. But, Evan, I got to know, you were not a McCaffrey guy. What was your reaction when you heard Carolina call his name?
Well, John, to be entirely honest with you, buddy, I was ecstatic. You know, I think anyone who watches the show knows how I felt about Christian McCaffrey and the Philadelphia Eagles. So I don't want to, go on my tangent like I did last week, but what I will say is I think he would work much better in a spot like Carolina with Jonathan Stewart continuing to be their power runner, and they can allow him to be a little bit more of the utility player that I think he's good at being. I think where Carolina drafted him and him not being shouldering the load will allow him to return punts, to return kicks, to be a little bit more of a slot receiver, like you said, John. But in Philadelphia, they would have asked him to be much more of a pure running back, and that wouldn't have worked for me. So to make a long story short, John, I guess what I'm really trying to say is I was at my buddy Jack Kern's house, and if I had the athleticism to do a backflip, I would. I would have. I was so excited when he got taken off the board. But it was also a very obvious selection, I thought. So I was really expecting him to go off the board by the number 8 selection or the Carolina Panthers, and it happened. So I felt really good about it.
Now, the 9th pick, this is where I didn't see this one coming. I actually went to the draft with a Bengals fan. I was reporting with a Bengals fan. And seeing John Roscoe at 9, that's something I didn't see coming. He didn't see coming. And the 3 receivers winning 9 picks, I was like, whoa, okay. Now you're starting to see the Eagles board go, okay, Marshawn Lattimore's still on the board. Jonathan Allen's still on the board. Malik Hooker's still on the board. Derek Barnett's still on the board. Marlon Humphrey's still on the board. The Eagles are going to end up with a very quality player. I mean, this is when it's like, okay, how many of those quality players will still be left by 14? Then 10 comes around, and good old Andy Reid moves up in the draft and picks. It's like more offense is going, and I'm going, oh, my gosh. And this is where I'm starting. Just went, maybe Marshawn Lattimore falls to 14. That's when I started to get my hopes up a little bit. I was like, come on, Lattimore, fall. But then by the Saints need defensive help badly. The Lattimore pick, I mean, what a value pick for the Saints to get Lattimore. And then 12, Cleveland comes up. They need a quarterback. Well, they say, hey, we're going to trade it. Houston, they say, we need a quarterback. And they take Deshaun Watson. And so another offensive player taken out the board. I'm just like, this is such a defensive first draft, and offensive players are just flying off the board. And so at the time, you had the linebacker from Temple still on the board, Jonathan Allen on the board, Malik Hooker on the board, Marlon Humphrey on the board, Derek Barnett on the board, Reuben Foster on the board. It's like, man, the Eagles have options no matter who the Cardinals take. Cardinals take the linebacker from Temple. And then this is where it opened up. This is where the Eagles had to make the choice. Jonathan Allen, he has the shoulder struggles. Reuben Foster, Derek Barnett, obviously Evan has talked great things about him the past month, and then Marlon Humphrey, who I really wanted the Eagles to pick because he was a good corner, solid. I thought he was a top 5 pick before the mocks came out like 2 weeks ago. But Derek Barnett, you can't complain about. He's one of the best edge rushers in college football last year. He gets off the edge so well, and that's who the Eagles ended up selecting at 14. And I rewatched Barnett's film. And one thing that Evan always was talking about was hand strength and how he uses his hands. And I started paying attention to that. And it's unbelievable how easily he would swat offensive tackles' arms, or how he would be positioning in under the offensive tackle's arms to get to the quarterback. I mean, this guy read the snap so well in college. Eagles fans got to be ecstatic with getting Barnett at 14.
Well, John, I do agree with you. I agree that obviously people should be excited about Derek Barnett. I mean, heck, I've been talking about Derek Barnett on the show for over a month. John, you're totally correct about his hand ability, but it goes more than that. I heard that I think it was Mike Mayock on the NFL Network compared Derek Barnett to Brandon Graham. Well, I don't really agree with that. Actually, the comparison that I like a little bit more is Terrell Suggs. And what I mean by that is Terrell Suggs, I believe, ran a 4.84 at his 40 at his combine, and Derek Barnett ran about a 4.8 at his. And he's also very bendable. He's very flexible. He can get under and around offensive tackles on his way to the quarterback. He has a variety of moves. He isn't just, a push the pocket physical guy. He's got a number of counter moves, which we've talked about on the show. I think that's something that this team sorely lacks. And also, John, he's not just a pass rusher. He's very, very good. I mean, very good, if not great or borderline elite against the run. Great run discipline, very physical. Willing tackler against the run. One thing that's very important, John, is that you need to be willing to play the run. It doesn't really matter if you're physical, if you're strong, if you have lane discipline. If you're not really ready to go compete in those trenches and make a tackle against the run, it really doesn't matter what your physical gifts are. I mean, if you go back to Jason Babin a couple years ago in Philadelphia, he was a defensive end with all the physical gifts in the world in a wide 9 and was useless against the run. I just don't think that's something he really wanted to do. Now, Brandon Graham does that well, but he isn't necessarily the polished pass rusher that Derek Barnett is. Now, I fully anticipate Derek to be a day one starter, to be the type of player that comes with energy, comes with class, comes with physicality, but he's also a monster on the field. He's a physical, angry defensive end, and that's something that I really like. Now, I was arguing with my friends a couple times after the draft, and a lot of people were like, oh, he was a solid player. You know what you're going to get out of Derek Barnett, really minimizing what this guy can potentially be. And I couldn't disagree with him with anybody more. Again, people look at the measurables. How fast are you? How athletic are you? How high can you jump? People forget, John, and I think the reason why there's so many busts in the first round in particular is everybody's so worried about combine warriors, upside potential, measurables, that they just forget to turn on the tape and see, can this guy play the game of football? And I promise you one thing, Derek Barnett can play the game of football. He plays it with a passion, with a pride, with a physicality that we haven't seen around here in a long time. And I think that he can really be an it factor for the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward. This isn't just a pass rusher. This is a blindside pass rusher. All right. You don't have to line him up against the right tackle on the quarterback's front side. He can play on the backside against elite tackles, against left tackles. And I think he'll be effective from day one. I think at the absolute low end, he's a consistent player. And at the top end, Terrell Suggs at one point was an AFC Defensive Player of the Year. And that's what I think Derek Barnett brings to the table. I think that's a great comparison. And he also can play in space. Every once in a while, Tennessee would drop him back. And I know that won't happen too much in Philadelphia, if at all, but he can do that too. He can play in space. So he isn't necessarily just a 4-3 wide 9 guy. He's versatile in that aspect. So if you were to change your defense moving forward, Derek Barnett can still compete and still be a good player. This is the type of things you really need in the NFL moving forward, John, because I think neither of us really believe that Jim Schwartz is going to be the defensive coordinator here for 10 years. You really need a guy like Derek Barnett who can change and evolve with systems and still be an effective player. I don't think he needs a wide 9 to be effective. And I don't necessarily think he needs to be in a 4-3 to be effective. I think that's how good this player is. I think he's just a football player. And don't forget, John, I know Terrell Suggs was at one point, if not to this day, the all-time leading sack goer in Division I history. Now, Derek Barnett was not that, but he did break Reggie White's all-time leading sack number at the University of Tennessee. I'm not calling him Reggie White. I understand that Reggie White broke that record at a time when teams weren't passing as much, making it much more of a impressive number for Reggie than it would be for Derek. But in the end, Derek Barnett, broke that record, was a consistent sack guy, and just comes every play. And there has to be something to be said for that. And I'd rather take heart, technique, and physicality over measurables and top end potential every day, because everybody's so worried about what could be that they're not really looking at what is. And what Derek Barnett is a one hell of a defensive end. He is one hell of a pass rusher, and this is something that is, in my opinion, I think pass rusher might be the most important part of any team in the NFL. If you can get to a quarterback, you can cover on the back end much easier. Quarterbacks can't get in rhythm. Offenses can't get in rhythm. Teams run more. They become more one-dimensional. And the way things are going, John, with the way teams are passing as much as they are, you need consistent pressure. And I honestly think Derek Barnett will not only bring that by himself, but he's going to take double teams away from Timmy Jernigan, Brandon Graham, and obviously John Fletcher Cox. And those types of guys are going to get more one-on-one coverage now or one-on-one blocking, and everything will loosen up.
And we're talking about defensive ends being so important. I mean, that's what won the Giants 2 Super Bowls and won the Broncos Super Bowl. So without those D ends, they don't win those Super Bowls. So you're exactly correct how important the D end position is. One thing, I actually got to talk to Derek Barnett at the red carpet ceremony before the draft started. It was like an hour before the draft. And I was asking Barnett, I was like, what separates you from all the other D ends in the NFL draft? And he was just telling me, I get to the quarterback, but I also stop the run. Like, he didn't even hesitate when I asked it. Right away, he had that answer ready to go. And to add to your point, you noticed that on film. He said it to me right away. So just that quick response is just like, hey, I'm going to get to your QB. I'm going to get to the QB, and hey, I'm going to stop the run. So that was cool to hear from Barnett. So, Evan, I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, who did you say was going to get picked in the first round?
Derek Barnett. I called it.
There you go.
And John was like,
see, all the other drafts out there that had Eagles, Evan called it. This is why you should listen to our podcast. Evan called the first round pick. He's been calling it for a month. That's why you should come to our show. Evan called that. And we did pretty well the rest of the draft as well, so we'll get to that later. But I just got to know, like, I'm fascinated how this draft played out the first 14 picks, because we kept hearing we kept even just looking at the board. This is a defensive first draft, and you saw 3 quarterbacks, 3 receivers, and 2 running backs all go before the Eagles, and I was just like, were you thinking the same thing?
Not at all, John. To be entirely honest with you, I think this draft tells us 3 things. One thing, that the so-called experts are really just glorified fans. They don't really know much more than we do, John. If you're a good educated fan, you really know just as much about any expert, because it's all guesswork. Second of all, what this shows you is just how starved of a quarterback league this is. Even in a weak quarterback class, teams are going to move up and grab quarterbacks because they're desperate. John, you and I both can agree that Mitch Trubisky is probably not the second best player in the 2017 NFL draft.
Not even close.
Probably a good chance that he won't really be a good quarterback moving forward. And there were comparisons between him and Carson Wentz. When neither of them played that much, they both have similar measurables. I even heard on WIP, I agree, saying, well, what's the difference between Carson Wentz and Mitch Trubisky? They both played not that much, this or that, very difference in, very similar in physical stature. Well, John, the big difference is Mitch Trubisky played in a spread offense and Carson Wentz played in a pro-style offense. And that means a lot more than how many snaps you take on the field. It's comfortability with the pro-style offense. And that, in my mind, is the difference between the two. But even Mahomes, in my mind, Kansas City moving up for him is another situation where they just feel like they need to grab a quarterback. And this is the year to grab a quarterback, and they're not really worried about whether he's a good quarterback or not, because I think they overvalue their own coaching staff and they feel like they can bring a quarterback along. Whether they can or whether they can't, I don't understand. I personally believe that Deshaun Watson was by far the best quarterback in this draft, and I think Houston got a steal. But like I said, I think it goes to show just how quarterback-starved this league is, how quarterback-driven this league is. And you can also see that why the wide receivers got taken as early as they were. Who do the quarterbacks throw to who are so important? The wide receivers. And the third thing this shows you, John, are the teams that are bad are usually bad because they can't draft. And they panic and they make decisions really based on appeasing fan bases, I think. And that's why the Chicago Bears haven't been much for a long time, and that's why they're going to stay bad for a long time. That's why I think teams like the Cincinnati Bengals taking John Ross. I mean, to me, he's just another Ted Ginn. If you remember Ted Ginn coming out of Ohio State, he was a top 10 pick. I think he was 7 overall to the Miami Dolphins in the early 2000s. Don't quote me on the year. I'm not entirely sure. But, he was a burner. Everyone thought he was going to be the next Randy Moss. He turned out just to be really of a fourth receiver and return guy, and that's what I think John Ross is. And I just think when you go out to appease the fans, if you want to come out with a flashy pick, if you panic and you draft for need as opposed to your best player available, then you struggle. And you saw the teams that moved up on the draft board that panicked for their guys. Those are the teams that historically struggle. Even the Kansas City Chiefs, John. I know that it's been better since Andy Reid's been around, but if you go back before Andy Reid, that team was awful for a long time, and it's still the same, ownership, and I think a lot of the same front office. Don't quote me on that, but there's something the same. And I just think, teams that make mistakes tend to stay making mistakes, and they kind of stay average. And I think the big difference for the Philadelphia Eagles this year was Joe Douglas, 100%. I think he kept Howie Roseman from wheeling and dealing and moving up and going to grab some guy. They stayed pat. They stayed at their board. They took the best player available every single round. And I really think that's just why this is the best draft the Eagles have, in all honesty, top to bottom. I know it's easy to say this on almost May 1st. It's 11:30 at night. It'll be May 1st in a half hour. I know it's easy to say that this is the best draft since 2002 right now. And it'll take multiple years to really go back and grade a draft. But what it looks like right now, that this might be the best draft the Eagles have had top to bottom in 15 years. And I think that's because they just stayed pat. They didn't worry about appeasing the fans. They didn't worry about getting a sexy or glamorous pick. They stuck to their board, and they got the best player available. They did that in the first round. They did it in the second round. They did that in the third round. You can go all the way down, and there can be arguments made at every single position that was, in fact, the best player on the board. And that, to me, is what is the hallmark or a calling card for a good draft. And, you look at the teams like the New England Patriots, John. I mean, when was the last time they had a sexy first-round draft pick? It's been a long time, and they continue to win. Now, drafting's important, but the depth of the draft is more important than the sexy name in the first round. And that's where I think the Eagles nailed it. And that's where I think teams like the Chicago Bears, like the Kansas City Chiefs, like the Houston Texans really failed, because they went and they got a sexy name at a sexy position, and they ignored the fact that these quarterbacks probably can't play. And just pretty much just to appease fans.
And we're going to move on a little bit. Here's a question request from my dad. I got to get you to answer this. He wanted you to answer this question, Evan. Eric Barnett, but with how the draft board actually figured out, there was a lot of options the Eagles could have taken at 14. If Barnett wasn't there, who would you have wanted?
Malik Hooker.
Even though they got McLeod and
who cares?
And Malcolm
Who
Jenkins?
cares? Those are two nice safeties, John. They're very nice safeties. But Rodney McLeod, he's a good player, but he did fall off a little bit at the back end of last year. And Malcolm Jenkins, in my mind, is a jack of all trades, master of none. He's very nice at a lot of different things. But I have found nobody yet who can sit here and pinpoint what exactly Malcolm Jenkins does great, does elite. Well, Malik Hooker is a ball hawk. He's drawing comparisons to Ed Reed
comparisons.
And that to me is, John, if you could go and get Ed back in 2002, when Ed Reed was drafted, you had Brian Dawkins and Michael Lewis. And knowing what you know now, would you have drafted Ed Reed, gotten rid of Michael Lewis, and moved Brian Dawkins to strong safety?
Yeah, that would have been crazy.
Would you have done it?
I mean, you would have had two potential Pro Bowlers. Like, looking back on it, yeah, you would.
So why wouldn't you do that here? Don't overthink it. Just take the best player available. And I think Jonathan Allen was probably one of the best players available, but he's not really a scheme fit at all. He, at a 4-3, is he a D tackle? Is he a D end? I think he's much more of a 3-4, defensive end, and I think that was a perfect pick for the Washington Redskins. And Reuben Foster has shoulder issues on his own. And you just don't know about his issues physically. Now, I'm not worried about the diluted sample. I'm not too worried about the character issues. I'm just looking at injury issues. And also going to a school like the University of Alabama, John, how easy it is to do your job when everyone around you is a blue-chip 5-star recruit. That's how I feel about Reuben Foster. It's difficult to gauge just how good he is when everyone's that good in that front seven. Ryan Anderson was a second-round pick. Jonathan Allen was a first-round pick. Marlon Humphrey was a first-round pick. When you put all those things together, it's very difficult to look back and say how good is Reuben Foster on his own. Now you can say, oh, he's a hard hitter. He's a hard guy. He runs, he does all these things. But John, the biggest, what the biggest part about productivity is? Availability. You can't be productive if you're not available. And there are big issues with Reuben Foster and Jonathan Allen, whether they'll be available. I think even with Jonathan Allen, John, I think his shoulder issue is being labeled degenerative, which means it's only going to get worse. So you just don't know. And Derek Barnett's healthy. And on top of that, I'm a firm believer that he was the best player on the board at 14.
Yep.
Good. I really think he's that good.
And we're gonna head to the sixth. Now we got 6 more rounds to talk about. Second round rolls around, and still lots of corners on the draft board. I mean, was gone. Adoree Jackson was gone. Tre'Davious White was gone. They all went in the 20s. But there was still a good amount of corners on the board. But there was 2 corners everyone was talking about are the best corners available. But Evan and I really didn't like them. It was Quincy Wilson and Kevin King. I was just like, please go before Philly. Please go before Philly. So when I saw Kevin King was the first pick in the second round, I was like, yes. And then Quincy Wilson went to Miami a couple picks later, Florida, Miami, whatever. I was like, whoo. And then it's like, okay, are the Eagles going to take a corner, or are they going to take Dalvin Cook? And Vikings traded up, and they took Dalvin Cook, and Eagles did not get Dalvin Cook. Fans were disappointed in that one. That got a lot of boos from Eagles fans when Cook got picked by the Vikings fans. Good pick by Minnesota. They haven't really figured out their running back situation since Adrian Peterson. They pick up Dalvin Cook. Good move by them. And then Eagles pick came up, and they picked the player I predicted they were going to pick, and that's Sidney Jones, who I thought was the second best corner in this draft before. But of course, second best corner. Why is the second best corner in the second round? Well, he ruptured his Achilles at his pro day in March. His doctor says he's going to be out till October. He doesn't even play at all this season. But when you 76ers approach and just rest your draft pick for a year, this is what Sidney Jones is going to offer you once he comes back. Great positioning once that ball flies in that air. I mean, he just has tremendous vision. I mean, he reads the quarterback so well, positions himself so well once that ball's in the air. Great height, I think. I mean, I know he's 6 foot 181. That's taller. That's taller than some corners still. And he jumps so high. Like, with the way he gets his positioning, he allows himself to be able to compete with taller receivers. And he's got a great eye for the ball. And one thing that just really stood out to me is he knows how to tackle. And when he tackles, the helmet goes on the ball, and that creates plays as well. And does it stink that most likely this pick, you're not going to see him play this year? Yes, that stinks. But if you told me I could get Derek Barnett and Sidney Jones, I'll take that 100 times out of 100. And I'm kind of happy because I predicted it. So another reason to listen to our podcast. Evan predicted the first round. I predicted the second round. So that's why you should listen to us. So, Evan, what do you got on the Sidney Jones pick?
Well, John, for every reason why I was upset that you said him last week as your projected player, the same reasons why I'm a little worried right now. Obviously, if Sidney Jones comes back to 100%, I've got no problem with it. He's an elite corner. You plug him in on that left side, that left cornerback position, and you leave him there for 10 years. Now, the issue is, John, is like you said, he probably won't play this year. And I said that to you. And I also, this whole year, he's going to be trying to battle back physically, taking mental reps because he's not going to be on the field. He's going to miss an entire training camp. He's probably going to start the season on the PUP list, physically unable to perform list, non-football injury or however they'll categorize it, but he'll be out at least 6 weeks. Probably won't play this year. If he does, you don't really know what you're going to get out of him. Then on top of that, the whole next year, he might have mental issues. And you don't know how he's going to be able to drive off that Achilles. And you don't know if he'll ever come back. And if he doesn't work out, John, now you've spent a second-round pick on nothing. At least the bust gets on the field. And like I said before, John, productivity is linked very strongly with availability. Sidney Jones, everyone's talking about value pick and a first-round talent and all what he could be or what he was or what he is right now. I mean, John, if he's the best player on the injured reserve list, I mean, what's the point? What is the point? And I just think, the thing is before he was drafted, he was going to be back by late August, that he could play this year, that all these things are going around. As soon as he gets drafted, now all of a sudden it's, I'm not rushing back. And then you hear he might not play all of 2018. And to me, John, it's very troublesome. And it's not like it is in basketball where you tank on purpose, you take these injured players and you let them come back and all these things. The difference between basketball and football, John, is basketball is a contact sport, right? Football is a collision sport. And, it is a different type of animal, top to bottom. So to sit here and say they took the Sixers approach is asinine. It's ridiculous because it's untrue. All right. Well, what they did is they gambled on they're not necessarily trying to stash this player, hoping he comes back, all these types of things. They just took the best player available, which I like. And I don't want to talk into both ends of my mouth. I like. But this idea that he's going to come back healthy at some point this year or be what we think he could be next year, is going to keep rolling and have no issues, is totally asinine. It's going to take him at least 2 years to come back. He's going to, like I said before, miss an entire training camp, every OTA, every rep, every opportunity to perform. And you're not going to see what this guy can really be until 2019, I think. And at that point, John, the corners are – so we're going to say the cornerbacks are going to continue to struggle for the next couple of years. Is that what anybody wants? Now, obviously, the third-round pick makes me much more comfortable with Sidney Jones. and we'll talk about him later. But this idea that you can just stash him for a year, have everything be all holly jolly, sunshine, and farts in 2018 with Sidney Jones is ridiculous. It's going to be a multiple-year recovery for Sidney Jones. First physically, then mentally. And then on top of that, this isn't a linebacker. This isn't a lineman. This isn't a fullback or who tore his Achilles. This is a cornerback. All right. And he has to drive off his Achilles and play in space and be agile and be explosive and to drive on routes every play for 60 minutes for 16 games for over the course of his career. He's going to be driving off this Achilles. And the percentage of tearing your Achilles the second time around after tearing it once, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it skyrockets. And I mean, so to me, it's like, oh, well, if we get this guy who is who he was before after an Achilles injury, I mean, then it's a great pick. But the odds are, when you work the math, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get this guy that you thought he was. And I would love to be wrong. I would love to sit here and eat my own shoe come November when he's, Defensive Rookie of the Year. I would love that. But that's not going to happen because you're not going to get this guy in full strength till 2019. And at that point, he's missed so many years, so much time. He's multiple years older, and the corners have been struggling for so long. I mean, and who's to say he doesn't come back in 2018, struggle mentally with it, all of his confidence is shattered, and he's a lost pick that way. So what do you think you're going to get out of this guy? It's wishful thinking, all right? It's wishful thinking, and it's totally – none of it's based in reality. I think people who sit here and say Sidney Jones is going to be the player we thought he was before his injury in 2018, you're the mayor of your own parallel universe if you think that's the case. It's just not going to work out that way.
The one thing that Eagles fans can be happy about this Achilles injury is, of the Achilles injuries players can have, this is like the best one to be able to recover from. It's on the upper part of the Achilles, which according to reporters, is not from me, this is coming from reporters I've been reading, that this is the best injury to come back from of the Achilles injuries. It being in the upper part of the Achilles will allow an easier comeback compared to other Achilles injuries. So I'm not trying to doubt how bad an Achilles injury is. It's very bad. But of the Achilles injuries he could have, this is the best one he could. And the thing is, the Eagles got to make a call by week 6 if they want to chance him at all the whole season or reserve lists for good. And before the draft, his doctors were saying till October. Now, Sidney Jones hasn't saying he's going to be out for the year. That was Howie and Joe Douglas talking. Howie and Joe Douglas aren't going to rush this. This is obvious. The Eagles are very adamant, and if you listen to the press conferences after the draft, they are not thinking Super Bowl at all this year. They are not thinking win now. They are thinking long term. Carson Wentz is young. Derek Barnett is going to be their defensive leader. They took Sidney Jones. This is clearly a team that's long term right now. They're not thinking win playoffs now. And that's what you got in Sidney Jones. And where you just got to hope he just stays healthy. He can recover from this Achilles. He can be there mentally, like Evan says. And hopefully it turns out, because if he can be anything what he was predicted to be, like 80% of what he was predicted to be, the Eagles got a great pick at in the second round. But here was another moment happened in the second round that was probably the best part of the draft that wasn't the Eagles selections. I got to know how – it was just fun to watch being an Eagles fan. And you probably loved watching as an Eagles fan because it was just great football fun. And that's when the Cowboys made their pick. They had Drew Pearson go up on stage. And he messed with the Philly fans, and the Philly fans booed him out of the building. But he kept saying jokes towards Evan. It made me miss Eagles-Cowboys so much. Like, I cannot wait till they play again. So, Evan, what did you think of Drew Pearson ripping on the Philly fans?
Oh, it was great, John. It was all in good fun. And I think anybody who saw this for what it was just saw it as, an old guy coming back and, having some fun with the fans, understanding what he was going to get out of the fans, understanding basically being a showman and having good fun. Now, London Fletcher did the same thing with the Redskins, I think, in the second round. And I just thought it was good fun. They know what they're getting out of the Philadelphia fans. The Philadelphia fans know what they're getting out of him. It's really nothing to harp on. I thought it was good, clean fun. And then Brian Dawkins and Brian Westbrook the next day, they answered back. And it was just all fun. I have no problem with any of that. I thought Drew Pearson is a showman. He was when he played in the 70s, and I think he still is today. And I thought that's exactly what the draft should be about. That from that perspective, it's for the fans, it's a TV, and that's what that is. And I thought that they nailed it, and I thought the fans nailed it with their response, and I thought it was great.
So obviously, Evan and I were talking. We've been saying this the whole season. My number one concern the entire offseason was corners. Well, Patrick Robinson was the corner they picked up in free agency. Second round pick the Eagles to take. He's probably not going to play this year. We still have a hole. The Eagles still have a holes at corners. So I start texting Evan after Sidney Jones goes off the board. Okay, Chidobe Awuzie's still there. Jordan Lewis is there. Cordray Tankersley's there. That's who we're kind of hoping falls to the Eagles in the third round. Now, remember, the Eagles traded back in the third round because they traded for Tim Jernigan, the defensive tackle from the Ravens. So they had a much later pick. And second round, third round keeps going. Chidobe Awuzie goes to the Cowboys. Tankersley goes. And then the Cowboys take Jordan Lewis. I was like, dang, Cowboys got Jordan Lewis and Chidobe Awuzie. That was kind of that was like a little punch on the chin for me. But Eagles took Rasul Douglas. And, Evan, who predicted that the Eagles would take Rasul Douglas in the third round?
That wasn't your first pick, though, in the third round, was it?
But still.
No, it's good. That's impressive. And it's good. I mean, guys, we picked at some form or another all top three picks. And I think that's good for business. So, keep tuning in. But yeah, Rasul Douglas, I think that pick, John, is what makes me not so angry about Sidney Jones, because I believe in Rasul Douglas. I know he's not particularly fast, but I've also heard that he plays a lot faster than his 40 time, which is about a 4.5, I'll tell you. And it was about a 4.5, right, John, with Rasul Douglas? Might even been a little slower than that, actually. But, great ball skills, very physical, very willing tackler, long, a competitor, very competitive football player, very willing to get better, very coachable from everything that I've heard. And I think Rasul is going to be in a situation that actually is very similar to the 76ers, where like TJ McDonald or TJ, crap, John, what's the name of the point guard for the Sixers? I'm blanking. Sorry.
TJ McConnell.
McConnell, excuse me. Yeah, McConnell. My mind's somewhere else. TJ McConnell. He's a guy, undrafted guy, probably wouldn't have gotten a chance anywhere else. Comes to the Sixers where there's no guards, continues to develop. And now he's at a point where he's a borderline starter. And it's really because he was in a situation where we had no other guards and you almost had to play him. And that's how I think with Rasul Douglas and the Philadelphia Eagles. He's going to get a chance to play a lot earlier than he would on most other defenses. And it's going to allow him to – and I think he'll struggle early, but he'll continue to get better. Like I said, he's a ball hawk. He led the nation in picks this year with 8. He does take chances, and because he isn't the fastest guy in the world, he doesn't recover well when he guesses wrong. But he's got good drive on the football. He's very athletic in that aspect. And he's, again, very physical, very aggressive player all the way around. And that's something that we've missed. We haven't had a ball hawk anywhere in this defense or a playmaker really since Asante Samuel. And he left here, 6-7 years ago at this point. So in my mind, it makes perfect sense.
What I like about Rasul Douglas, he plays through the whistle. One thing, he keeps playing. Obviously, what stands out about him is he's already the Eagles' biggest corner. He's 6'2", 209. So he's got great size, and he played zone coverage in West Virginia, which I think he'll be able to translate well style play. But like Evan said, the speed does concern you. Quicker receivers will burn him, but he doesn't give up on a play. When you're watching the Senior Bowl tape, the wide receiver would have the ball in his 2 hands, and he would punch it out, making an incomplete pass. So that's one thing I say, never giving up on a play, playing through the whistle. He's a football player, and this was such a Joe Douglas pick. when you listen to Joe Douglas, this is not a Howie pick in my mind. This is a Joe Douglas pick with Rasul Douglas. And you saw a Joe Douglas influence throughout this draft. Obviously, you play a lot of nickel situations in today's NFL. Who are the Eagles' 3 corners right now?
Are you asking me? I would say Rasul Douglas, Jalen Mills, and Ron Brooks. I don't really think there's any other option. I think
– And Brooks playing the slot?
Yeah, Ron Brooks in the slot, Jalen on the backside. Or actually, I think right now Jalen would probably be the left corner and Rasul Douglas being on that right corner. And once Sidney Jones comes back, if he comes back healthy, then I think you put Jalen Mills in the nickel. You start Rasul Douglas on the backside, and you put Sidney Jones on that left side. Then you have a cornerback group that you can grow with and pretty much – have stability there for the next 5 to 7 years. Now, eventually someone will get replaced, but they won't all be around for 10 years. But you'll get very consistent cornerback play for a long time. And one thing, Rasul Douglas actually reminds me a lot, John, of like I said, Asante Samuel, a zone off coverage type guy. He isn't as athletic as Asante, but drives on the football well. He's going to take chances. He's going to come up with big plays. Now, you can't bubble screen and take advantage of him from time to time. And like you said, his quickness, Rasul Douglas's lack of quickness, is going to limit him to playing along the perimeter. He's never going to be a nickel guy himself. But I do think Sidney and Jalen Mills can play that nickel cornerback spot very well. So I do think at the start, I would say, again, Jalen Mills on the left corner to the quarterback's strong side. I would say Rasul Douglas on the backside, and I would say ultimately Jalen Mills will probably be a nickel the way these 3 corners are shaking out.
Next round, we're going to the 4th round now. This was day 3. This was Saturday. Saturday at noon. That's what the draft is all about, right? Not this primetime baloney. But Saturday at noon was day 3 of the draft, and the Eagles' first selection on Saturday, Collins, 6'4", 209 receiver out of UNC. And when I saw this pick, I was like, uh-oh, that's not good news for Dorial Green Beckham. Not good news at all for him. And when you look at this Mack Hollins pick, this was a special teams pick. It all over it. The Eagles value special teams so much watching them the last couple of years, and Mack Hollins was regarded as a top 5 special teams cover guy. So when you see 6'4", 209, yeah, he can be a red zone threat, but all the talk about him is special teams with Hollins.
Well, John, like you said, he definitely is more of a special teams guy. I like his size. Yeah, I think, John, you know what, John, I don't really want to overanalyze this because you did a very good job. But what I will say about Mack Hollins, which I'm not entirely sure about, is you have a lot of size in Jordan Matthews. You have a lot of size in Alshon Jeffrey. Torrey Smith isn't a small guy. And to me, it's kind of like, where does Mack Hollins fit in there? And so in my mind, he's clearly a special teams guy. I mean, even Dorial Green Beckham's a bigger receiver. Alshon or Nelson Aguilar is a bigger guy. So Mack Hollins, in my mind, is just another guy in that fold. So in my mind, he is the 5th wide receiver on the team. If you remember a few years ago when Chip Kelly was here, we brought in that wide receiver who played for the Jets, and he came out of Mizzou, Brad Smith, I think.
Yeah, Brad Smith, yeah.
Very much a team's player. And then the following year, they brought in another receiver, I totally blank on his name, from the San Diego Chargers, who was another one who was just all special teams. And that's where I see Mack Hollins fitting in. Now, I wish I knew that player's name. That whoever, if you're watching this podcast and you remember his name, please put it in the comment section. I'm not going to look it up. But there was a special teams receiver that was brought in under the Chip Kelly era from the San Diego Chargers, and that's all he did. So there is a place for that. It's just I don't see him being a consistent receiver for this team. And I thought, if anything, they might have taken him a little high. And I think Shelton Gibson, the guy we're going to talk about a little bit later, has a much better chance to be a successful regular receiver than Mack Hollins will, even though Mack Hollins was drafted before him. That being said, I think Mack Hollins will ultimately be more important because of what he brings to that third phase of the game, his special teams abilities, ability to, be a gunner on the kick team, block and kick returns if not being a return guy, or a gunner on the punt team, excuse me, doing all those different things that you almost need to for every year in free agency. Well, now you just drafted a guy and you can kind of worry about that a little bit less because he'll be around for 3 or 4 years doing those things. So in my mind, that's very important.
So the next player we're going to talk about is a running back. Running back was an interesting story. Obviously, Fournette went at 4, McCaffrey went at 8. Eagles didn't think Cook was worthy of a first-round pick. Then Cook went in the second round just a couple picks before the Eagles. And I was like, should the Eagles have traded up to get Cook? I know the Vikings did end up trading up to get him. And so it left you after days 1 and 2 of the draft being like, what are the Eagles going to get at running back? And I was saying Wayne Gallman. Evan, you were saying Marlon Mack. And the Eagles ended up taking 5'9", 170-pound Donnell Pumphrey out of San Diego State. When you just look at this guy and what kind of player he is, this is like you're hoping the next Darren Sproles. I mean, that's what you're hoping when you see a guy his size and what he brings to the field. I mean, he's a much smaller guy. He's going to be a change of pace back. He can catch the ball. He's really quick and can make great cuts, and he can have those breakaway runs. But at the end of the day, 70 pounds, there's still so many questions at running back.
Well, John, I do think that's interesting. Donnell or DJ Pumphrey, he led the league or the NCAA in total rush yards. I think he broke the record, didn't he, John?
Yeah, he broke the record.
And this is a guy who, from everything I've heard, is despite his measurables, despite his size, he's been nothing but productive. And I know he's very quick. He gives you that type of versatility. I know he can give you something on the return game. In my mind, this is another example of a football player. I think this is another Joe Douglas pick. And we're finding more and more of those, John. Well, you and I have kind of brought that up a lot. That's something that Rasul Douglas is. That's certainly something that Derek Barnett is, and I think that's something that DJ Pumphrey is. And this is, in my mind, this is a pick that I think people get really excited about. And don't sell this guy short. I think you're saying that hopefully he's another Darren Sproles. I think that's realistically what he'll be. But he's been nothing but undervalued, underlooked. Really kind of just golfed at his entire life. And look at him now. He's a 4th-round pick in the NFL. He was the all-time leading rusher in history. And he's a baller. And in my mind, don't sell that guy short. Maybe this guy turns out to be the running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. Don't worry. I mean, I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm saying don't sell him short because he's been nothing but successful despite being sold short at every level his entire life. When you're 5'9", I mean, just ask John. He's a short kid himself. When you're short, people overlook you, especially on athletic fields. And a lot of these guys, they do nothing but produce, nothing but be successful. Look at Isaiah Thomas in the NBA. And like I said before, football's a collision game. It's a little bit different. I get all that. But DJ Pumphrey, he's been nothing but successful his whole life. And he's done nothing but just totally surpass expectations. And in my mind, why wouldn't that not happen here? So who knows? Maybe he turns out to be the starting running back. Maybe Wendell Stallings picks up. Maybe they throw the football 60 times a game and they never run the ball. Who knows what happens? But I don't know. I look at DJ Pumphrey, and I think they're going to give him a real chance to compete early.
5th round, this is where I had flashbacks to where I used to live. I started off as a reporter in Nebraska, and then I became a behind-the-scenes guy in West Virginia. And Shelton Gibson, a wide receiver out of West Virginia, that was a name I heard all the time. And then Nathan Gary, out of Nebraska. I remember covering him, reporting at Nebraska Husker games. So it was kind of a weird flashback I had in the 5th round. But let's talk about Shelton Gibson first, the wide receiver out of West Virginia. He's a Cleveland Heights guy, so all day at work today, people were telling me how happy I should be that the Eagles got him. Speedster. He's a speedster wide receiver. He ran a 4.38 at his pro day. A guy that can take the screens. You don't want him in open field if you're the defense, and go deep kind of guy. Like that's what he's going to bring to the table.
Well, first of all, John, I found the name of the guy I was talking about before, the old special teams guy. It was Shea Giratutu. Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Special teams guy. That's where I think the North Carolina receiver Hollins fits in. Anyways, to Shelton Gibson. In my mind, this is one of the better picks that they had. I know this is a guy who he's a deep guy, tracks the ball well. He plays a lot faster than his 40 time would suggest. He's another guy who ran about a 4.5, but he plays a lot faster than that. In my mind, Shelton Gibson brings something to the table we haven't seen here in Philadelphia in a long time. Who the player who's compared to the most was at West Virginia?
Everyone from the Cleveland area was saying Deshaun Jackson.
Deshaun Jackson, 100%, buddy. And that's what I'm not saying he's going to be that, but I do think that he is he is a deep threat guy. He's a vertical guy. He's got good hands, and he stretches the field well, and that's an element that we've lacked for a long time. And a guy like Shelton Gibson, in my mind, makes Torrey Smith pretty expendable. If Torrey Smith is just a little bit better than Shelton Gibson, they're going to keep Shelton Gibson because he's a lot less. Think about that, John.
Now, for some who aren't really into football, how many wide receivers does a team usually keep?
About 5 to 6.
6, okay. Who are more than 6 right now, don't they?
Well, yeah, but they're going to cut guys.
That's what I'm saying. But I mean, they're pretty big.
It will ultimately.
So let's look at
Jeffrey, Jordan Matthews. I think Shelton makes the team. I think Hollins makes the team. I do think Torrey Smith makes the team, and I think that's my 5. I mean, you know what? Actually, I do think they'll give Aguilar one more year. But they won't re-sign him after this year. So I do think the 6 fit in there, and that's assuming that Hollins from North Carolina is really your 6th guy there, mainly for special teams. And so you can almost make him kind of take him out of that equation.
You think who's going to get cut?
Dorial Beckham will get cut, which is a shame. He's got the physical upside, but he's just not producing. The little guy.
Treggs.
Treggs will get cut. I don't think Jordan Matthews' job is safe. I don't think they cut him, but I do think he could get traded. But I do think that ultimately won't happen. So again, Alshon Jeffrey's your 1. I do think Torrey Smith will probably be your 2. I do think Jordan Matthews will be your 3. I do think Shelton Gibson will make this team as the 4. I do think they'll keep Nelson Aguilar. That's 5. And I think Mac Hollins will kind of round out that roster as a special teams guy. So I do anticipate this team taking about 6 wide receivers. And you can do that because you don't keep a pure fullback on this team, and you can kind of mix and match and take the other players at different positions. So that in my mind, that they'll take 6, and those are the 6 they'll take. And Treggs and Dorial Green-Beckham are on the outside looking in.
All right. Here's a player I covered a lot in Nebraska, and this is such a Joe Douglas pick. It hurts. Nathan Gary, he was a safety in Nebraska. It's already been out there that he's going to play linebacker. He's 6 foot, like 218 pounds. So he's obviously going to put on some more muscle in the NFL training program to get to that linebacker size. And you want to talk about a guy that just loves tackling. That's what you see when you watch Nathan Gary. He just loves making plays on the ball, making the big hit. I mean, that's what stands out to you. He's a football guy, loves making that hit. And great. I mean, he's a great shape. He's got some speed to him, and he's just built. And I think now that he's going to be a linebacker instead of safety, he's just going to add more muscle to himself.
Well, John, yet again, another Joe Douglas pick, another football player. In my mind, he's more of a depth guy, more of, a special teams guy. But maybe he surprises us. Maybe he takes Michael Kendrick's job, because I don't think Michael will be here come after June 1st. I do think he's a guy that they let go after the June 1st wave there, when you can release him and save a little bit more money. But realistically, this guy is a depth guy, he's a special teams guy. He's a heart and hustle guy, Chris Maragos mold type guy, Ike Reese guy. I think Ike Reese is actually a very good comparison to somebody like this. A hard worker. Maybe he comes in some sub packages every once in a while, but he ultimately cuts his teeth, breaking up the wedge, even though the wedge isn't a thing anymore in the NFL, just kind of going down and tackling people in kick returns, punt returns, those types of things. You need those guys. And I think this guy almost how do you pronounce his name again?
Nathan Garrett.
Oh, yeah. That makes man, excuse me. I should have been able to do that right away. But I do think Garrett ultimately replaces a Najee Good, who was on this team mainly for special teams. But now, Nathan Garrett will be cheaper than Najee Good would be because Najee's making a veteran minimum, and Garrett will be making a rookie minimum, or on a rookie pay scale. So in my mind, this is a special team player that replaces a Najee Good.
And the last pick, this is something Evan and I kind of predicted that they were going to add depth to their defensive tackle position. Out of Washington, taking another Washington player, Elijah Qualls, a 300-pound dude, 6'1". Obviously, Bo Allen's hurt. This is going to be a guy that's going to be competing with Destiny and Bo Allen for that third spot with Fletcher Cox and Jenkins starting at D tackle. So obviously a depth move, but there's a guy that's going to be competing for that third spot with Bo Allen and Destiny.
Well, yeah, that's really all it is. I know Qualls is they run more of a 3-4 than a 4-3 because Sheldon, who was drafted out of Washington to go be the
they do play more of a 3. Yeah, they do.
So this guy was a nose guard in college, if I'm right.
You're right.
So, he does have to change his position. There's a huge difference between a 3-4 nose guard and a wide 9 defensive tackle. So who knows if this guy even makes the team, but he's there for depth. And one thing, guys, that everyone needs to be aware of is not every player drafted is going to make this team. And I do think that Qualls is somebody who might fall into the not ultimately making the team type thing because, Bo Allen struggled last year, and we've talked about that in this podcast when he started. And he was a nose guard in college. So you just don't know how things will ultimately play out. John, is Taylor Hart still on the team? I know they signed him off of the practice squad for the Niners practice squad before. I think Taylor Hart makes more sense as a backup defensive tackle in a wide 9 than somebody like Qualls or Bo Allen does. I do think Destiny Vitae is another one.
He's still in the Eagles.
Who makes a lot of sense. On the team?
Yeah, he's still on the team.
I think he makes more sense than a lot of these other guys. I think a 3-4 defensive end, will translate better to a 4.
Oh, hold on. Before you keep talking, this is from CSN Philly. They're actually defensive tackle to offensive tackle, so throw that out the window.
They're moving him to the end?
No, they're moving him to offensive tackle.
Taylor Hart?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good. Never mind then. My bad, guys. Well, ultimately, what I'm trying to say is Qualls in my mind might not be able to make the switch. And I think if there's one pick that really might not make the team, it's this one. But ultimately, I do think that there's a good chance that multiple people will make this team.
So those were the 7 picks the Eagles made. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I like the Eagles draft. Don't get me wrong. But one thing that stood out to me was Cowboys had a really good draft. Taco Charlton, Chidobe Awuzie, and Jordan Lewis. I saw their draft board. I was just like, the best team in the NFC East last year had a great draft. And I was just like,
John, does it bother you that the Cowboys and the Eagles' first 3 picks are the exact same positions in the exact same order?
It doesn't bother me. It's just like,
well, defensive end, cornerback on both teams.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me, but just like I liked all 3 players the Cowboys selected.
Well, what would you say? Would you take Taco Charlton over? Would you take Taco Charlton over Derek Barnett?
No, Derek Barnett's clearly better than Taco Charlton. That one, the Eagles are clearly. But
would you take?
If you ask me, would I rather have Awuzie and Lewis or Jones and Douglas? That's the one you got to think because Awuzie and Lewis too.
Well, John, I do think Lewis will be more of a nickel. And I think Awuzie, actually, we talked to him. He did play on the outside, but there were questions about whether he's a nickel or an outside guy. Who knows where he ends up. But Rasul Douglas, but the Eagles already have their nickel guy in Jalen Mills. And I think if Sidney Jones is healthy, I know that's a huge if, he's the best corner of the four that we're talking about. And Rasul Douglas is a game-changing physical ball hawk. In my mind, the Eagles got the better of the 3 picks if everything works out the way you want them to. So I think the Eagles, in my mind, in this draft, guys, I would say this is a B+ to an A- draft just because they didn't get real number 1 running back. And they also didn't get a legitimate, potentially starting outside linebacker. I think that you need to replace Michael Kendricks. And I do think that even though I really like DJ Pumphrey, and I did just say that he could compete for a starting job, I also don't think it's all that realistic either. So now the only reason why Brian Matthews is still on this team is because of the neck injury, and they can't legally cut him yet. So we still have no idea who the running back is. No idea who's ultimately going to be your will linebacker. And in my mind, those are 2 really big holes that you really haven't addressed. You really just replaced, probably realistically, Darren Sproles. And in terms of that outside linebacker position with Garrett, you really just almost replaced more Najee Good than you did Michael Kendricks. So what are we going to – I know this is a long-term process. I understand you're not trying to make the playoffs and win the Super Bowl this year, but you just didn't address these needs. And now we're going to be talking about these 2 positions going into next offseason, in my opinion. And, who knows what's going to happen? You just don't know. So another position, for all we know, somebody else will get hurt. Somebody could leave in free agency. Somebody could just not work out. And there'll be other positions that need improving. And I really thought this year that the running back position was something you really could tackle. And I really thought you could go out and find an outside linebacker in that 3rd, 4th round range you could potentially start. And you just didn't do either of those things. And now these are 2 gaping holes moving into the season. So who knows what's going to happen. However, ultimately, in my mind, this is a B+ draft. They did a great job at the positions they did tackle. It's just about what do you do with the outside linebacker, with running back moving forward.
Yeah, I was very pleased with this draft. This was one of my favorite Eagles drafts in a while, but I got the report at the NFL draft in the 1st round, and I'll give you guys a little behind the scenes of what I went through covering the draft. So I got into Philly around 8 o'clock Wednesday night. Me and the other sports reporters from a TV station, we checked out the scene. They did some live hits. We explored, I guess you would call it the site area. Morning, wake up. The first thing I go out and cover is the NFL had a Play 60 event, and it's where the NFL draft prospects got to teach kids in Philadelphia how just the fundamentals of football. And it was kind of funny. My first event I cover, I'm 1 foot away from Roger Goodell, the commissioner. And, man, Roger Goodell's small. He's my height and much, much skinnier. I didn't realize he was such a small guy.
Wait, 5'8"?
Yeah, he's really small.
I didn't know that. I thought he was like 6'4", 6'3".
No, he's a really little guy. And it was got to see Chidobe Awuzie, Leonard Fournette, and Corey Davis throw passes. So that was neat little event. In for the NFL draft at 3 o'clock. So we get in there at 3 o'clock. I talked to some fans, see who they think the players are going to take. In that fan area, it was just crazy just seeing the sea of people for a draft on the Parkway. It was just like incredible. And just seeing how the Rocky steps turned into a stage was so cool. The next thing I had to cover after I talked to the fans was I had to do the red carpet. Now, the red carpet, it was kind of like the Oscars red carpet where the cameras are behind a gate, and there's a red carpet from the top of the art museum steps going down, and the players dress up. They're with their family. And last chance to talk to the media before they get drafted, and they come and talk to each media person one by one. And I got to talk to Derek Barnett. Like I said, he told me he can make he can get to the quarterback and he can stop the run. Trubisky, who ended up being a second overall pick, he gave a shout out to his hometown, Ohio. Marshawn Lattimore, who just told me how he's a playmaker. He's a phenomenal playmaker. I asked him, like, what separates him from everybody else, and he just told me he's the playmaker of the corners. Deshaun Watson, he just says he was the top quarterback in the draft, like Evan said, and it was just cool. And the big part of being at the red carpet was right next to me when I'm interviewing all the players, because he was being a reporter for the day, was Eagles safety Rodney McLeod. So I was talking, shooting the breeze with Rodney McLeod, and I asked him, is he doing anything different this offseason? Is there anything Eagle fans should be looking forward to? And he was just telling me when it came to just preparing for himself, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So Rodney McLeod was very happy with his performance last year, and he's going to keep on doing the same thing. And I don't think Eagle fans can be upset. McLeod had a very good year last year. And I asked him, is there anything I should be looking out for? And this is where Evan should get interested, is used to be teammates. And he says Patrick Robinson's going to surprise some Philly fans.
No, he's not.
I mean, of course, McLeod's going to say that. That's his old teammate. It's his friend. It's his current teammate. Of course he's going to say something like that. But, I mean, I'm going to look out for it. I mean, I'm not going to doubt McLeod. I mean, obviously, Evan and I are going to scout him in the offseason, the preseason, but I just thought that's what Rodney McLeod had to say to me. After the draft starts, you're in the media room. You can hear the crowd's reaction to each pick. You hear when all the trades that are going through. And the media spread was lasagna. They had a vegetable medley and a grilled chicken. And they had all the Gatorade you could drink. And right next to me, they had Tony Bruno was right next to me where I was working. So I got to meet Tony Bruno, which was pretty cool. Obviously one of the bigger radio sports personalities in Philadelphia. And when the draft was continuing, I had an interview with Deshaun Watson, had an interview with Mitchell Trubisky, had an interview with Marshawn Lattimore again, just getting their reactions about getting picked. And all in all, it was an awesome experience, just being able to report the NFL draft. It's something I definitely want to do again.
Well, I hope you go. And again, next time you'll bring me along, John. I know.
Evan, you got to file for a credential, man.
You got to get me one. You're Mr. TV, man.
You can file for a credential. Anyone can file for a credential. You just got to get approved.
Well, we'll see. Maybe this time next year our show will really take off.
Dallas next year, so
I think it's in Dallas.
I think it's in Dallas, yeah.
Oh, that stinks.
But Evan, is there anything else you'd like to say about this draft before we go?
Again, a B+ draft. I'd like to welcome Derek Barnett, Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas, Matt Collins, Shelton Gibson, DJ Pumphrey, Garrett, and Qualls to the Philadelphia Eagles. And hopefully this is a base for a young team moving forward. Like I said, this was in my mind the most important draft because you already got your franchise quarterback. You're just trying to build around him. And hopefully we'll be successful. But remember, guys, it takes 3 years about to really grade a draft class. So we're not going to know in September or October how good these players are. So patience, guys, patience. Trust the process. What about you, John?
Promote our show. We produced the second round. So this is why you should listen to us for the Eagles podcast, because we called it, guys. We called it.
We did.
How much you want to listen to anybody else, the national outlets, we called it.
We did. I told you, at the end of the day, these experts are just glorified fans. That's it.
But we'll see you next week. We'll bring you more Eagles news, and we'll bring you the latest with Philadelphia sports news. See you later, everybody.
And Sean shaving his eyebrows.
Not happening.